let's get started talking about the first two chapters of the book. We're going to try to do half the time on one chapter, half the time on the other chapter. And it's also important for you guys to know that each chapter is 2% of the exam questions. So you could expect 2 questions from each chapter out of 100. Data management underlies all of the other domains of the book. This is a good introductory chapter. And then data ethics, it's kind of deprioritized on this exam, but if this is something that you're passionate about, we also have a study group for that, and I will drop that link into the chat. So what do? I run the website Data Strategy Professionals. I've been doing this for about 2 years. This is our Facebook. This is our FocusMate group. You might see me there doing co-working sessions. FocusMate will pair you randomly with someone in our FocusMate group. This is a great way to have an accountability buddy for the times when you're studying. FocusMate is a wonderful platform for this. If you have more questions, I also wrote an article recently to explain why I like this tool so much. All right, data management. This is my favorite diagram in the entire data management body of knowledge. It's called the Aiken framework. It's named for Peter Aiken, who is currently the president of Data Management Association that runs the CDMP exam. I like to think that probably the folks at DAMA test you a little bit more on their own materials. So if you're prepping for the specialist exams, it's probably a good idea to read the books that are written by the people who are currently in DAMA leadership. I will also drop a link in case you're curious what are the specialist exams and what are these books that I recommend. Lots of good resources on the website for people to do continued study. So returning to the Aiken pyramid, the reason this is so helpful, I think it's a useful framework to communicate to clients why they can't jump to the top. They can't, or they shouldn't, try to start an initiative with data science without having first put into place the basics of data governance, metadata, data architecture, data quality, etc. The idea is you progress from building the foundation of the pyramid up towards these more specific domains at the top. Yeah, a common failure mode that we see is people wanting to go too quickly into advanced analytics without having first confirmed the quality of their data or having put structures in place to maintain data governance. And what happens when you do this is a bit like trying to build a Jenga tower from the top down. It's either literally impossible or it's likely to collapse. And yeah, having good data quality is just a key aspect of a positive organizational culture around data. So pyramid, it's pretty self-explanatory. Okay, so why is data management important? I think I sort of previewed this a bit with the prior slide. But data management helps an organization unlock their comparative advantage. The idea here is that it enables the company to put into place the plans, policies, programs, and practices to deliver, control, protect, and enhance the value of their information assets throughout the data lifecycle. So as we know, there's more and more data being created each day. So we're continuously breaking records in terms of the amount of information that's available. So this data management idea is just becoming more and more important over time. Let's talk now about the data lifecycle. So this is a helpful framework to understand all the things that you do with data as a process. It's a bit of a cycle, and you won't want to keep all of the data that you have. So there's also a component of archiving, purging, disposing of data as well. So we'll talk a bit more about each of these phases in turn, starting with plan. The idea here is setting out your data management processes. You would write a data governance charter. This is an important document that outlines the overall data strategy. If you join the CDMP Facebook group, which is linked here in the chat, we are studying data governance in the month of February. For members, there will be a session like this one on the importance of data governance and all the things you need to know for the exam. Typically, those sessions are on the last day of the month. We'll talk more about data governance in the group and in that meeting. Also, in the planning stage, you would define the procedures for other aspects of the chapters that are tested, the exam. So those include data quality, which is chapter 13, data security, chapter 7, data retention, which it doesn't have its own chapter, but it's still very important. It's kind of falls into chapter 2, so that a bit about data privacy and data ethics. And another important thing is once you have your data governance documents, then you'll want to enshrine those in the organizational structure. So this means hiring or elevating data stewards into a formalized role. And we'll talk more about this structure and how to put best practices in place when we review chapter 3. Okay, so moving on to the design and enable stage. I think that this field incorporates data architecture as well as data modeling. These are chapters 4 and 5 of the DMBOK. They're quite important for the exam. As you're reading, make sure you allocate sufficient time to review these chapters. In data modeling, we move through its own life cycle. You'll start with building a conceptual model, move to a logical model, and then move to a physical model. There's a fourth optional step, which I think is quite cool. And this is the idea of actually going backwards. So then starting with the physical model that you've created, imagining that you weren't the one that did all the work, and going backwards and trying to see if you can reverse engineer the business requirements that initiated the process. I think this is a cool practice to potentially implement in your organization. Okay, and then another thing that falls into the design and enable category is the idea of access controls. When you're storing your data, who has the appropriate authorization to access the data? This falls into chapter 2, which is ethical data handling. You'll see a lot of times startups will get in trouble for giving people inappropriate data access. This came out as part of like the Twitter papers in the last couple of months. This is an important aspect of being a safe data handling strategy, is strategizing about who needs access to data and allowing for minimal access rights. There's one other thing here. Oh yeah, cloud. So like whether you want to really dive into cloud depends on your organizational needs and also maybe your career goals. Cloud architecture is really dynamic field. I think everybody should get certified in the basics of cloud. So if you're in the AWS ecosystem, an example of this is taking the AWS Cloud Practitioner certification. It's pretty quick to do, so you could do it after you get CDMP certified. I think these skills transfer well across the different cloud platforms. They're pretty undifferentiated. So if you learn how AWS works, it's basically the same, but with different names. If you're then moving to a company that uses Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud Platform or whatever. So depending on your role and your goals for moving up over time, it could be good to also learn cloud architecture. Okay, so we're going to run through the create and obtain phase. These activities could be either taking the data that is created by your organization, or it could be bringing in information from third parties. For example, augmenting your data with government records or transactional data that you purchase from a third-party vendor. I think the rest of this is pretty self-explanatory. So we've got creating, acquiring, extract, import, migrate, and organize. These are the things that fall into data collection stage. Next up, we have store and maintain. Chapter 6 is data storage and chapter 13 is data quality. So I think that's the maintain aspect of it. Important steps that fall into this lifecycle phase are validation, editing, cleaning, conversion, and review. Okay, next up, we have using the data. This is everybody's favorite part. One example of this could be reporting. So I said that was chapter 11, which is data warehousing and business intelligence. And then you've also got enhance. So this is more kind of moving into analysis, maybe like basic statistical aggregation or statistical modeling, which falls into chapter 14, which the DMBOK calls big data, but I would prefer to refer to as data science. These are the major stages. I didn't cover dispose of. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. One reason why you might want to dispose of data is to comply with GDPR. So since 2018, the EU has requested that companies operating in the EU provide us with a mechanism for requesting data deletion. So this is a bit of an Ouroboros. If you can think about why this is problematic, it's because in order to in the record that you have deleted a customer's data and that you are complying with GDPR, you must store some information about the customer. So you need to have that information on record in order to maintain that you're compliant. But then it's like also not possible to keep that information and be compliant because GDPR requests that you have totally removed the customer's data. So hopefully this kind of thing improves in the future. Like government regulations are always changing. The US is exploring whether to put forward a federal policy. We'll see if that ever happens. Maybe they can avoid some of these traps and paradoxes. So, Vishal.
Thanks, Nicole. These are like some catch-22 situations we come across. Like as you said, GDPR doesn't allow for any customer data to be stored, but for the data deletion request which has come from the customer, this has to be stored. And we are also trying to deal the same issue over here. Like as a bank, we are required to store customer information for 7 years for all transactions. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Thank you for bringing up a relevant example from your field. I think this is really important for helping people to take the information from the DMBOK, which can be very theoretical, and think about how it applies to their day-to-day work. So yeah, I appreciate that. This is not tested on the CDMP, but it's kind of interesting. Just a side note, and we'll get into this when we talk about the next section, but the DMBOK was published, or we're on version 2 now. So version 2 was published in 2017. So this was when GDPR was published, it was put forward in 2016, but it was not implemented until 2018. So the DMBOK is unaware of the challenges of this legislation. It won't test you on anything that occurs after 2017 until they update, which I'm dreading because I have to update all my page numbers. But it's good for the data management ecosystem. So let's keep going. Here are some quasi-paradoxical statements about data from the DMBOK. I will let you guys read this. They're sort of funny. And Maddie asks, are they making the DMBOK version 3? So I'm not looped into this. They did ask for corrections. I think the intention was to put out a corrections page. You can check it out for yourself. Oh, and you can contribute yourself if you like. I would really like to see them include a section about cloud. That is sort of a sidebar, but I think learning cloud is really important and it's not going away and they don't talk about it at all. I guess it really wasn't as important in 2017. Anyway, we've got our quasi-paradoxical statements about data. I think it'd be fun to start a fortune cookie company that just includes those little catchphrases only for the data management lovers. This was one that I think is particularly interesting. And it's good to know that Laura Sebastian Coleman, her work is heavily represented in the DMBOK. If you want extra credit rating, check out her work. Okay. I'm going to skip this one. This just lists different types of data. I hope you're not tested on this because I think it's pretty arbitrary. I think there's all types of data and it's changing all the time. Data management risks. Also, these are pretty self-explanatory. We know that if you have poor quality data, it's a risk to your organization. If two business units have a misunderstanding, this can lead to devastating consequences. Obviously, you have to comply with regulation around how you collect, store, dispose of your data, sometimes even analyze your data. Yeah, definitely keeping your data anonymous and making sure that someone can't reverse engineer based on your aggregations and then generate like actual customer specific data. So it really applies across the entire data lifecycle, this idea of regulatory compliance. And then privacy. Yeah, so we'll get into that next. Cool. Okay, so moving right along. Data ethics is also 2% of the exam. So out of these slides, you might see 2 questions on the test on average. Data ethics refers to standards to manage data properly. This includes data integrity standards and data privacy practices. According to the DMBOK, the foundations of data ethics are based in the Belmont Principles, which came out in 1979. So this referred to the protection of human subjects in research. The 3 Belmont Principles were respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. This is useful to know. I think it's likely that you might see a question somehow about the Belmont Principles. So you would just understand that this was related to human subjects in research, and these ideas are then transposed into the data management domain. Next up, we have some examples of data ethics standards that were put into place before the publication of DMBOK Edition 2. In 2000, Canada put forward their Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act. I'm waiting for a Canadian to come on this call and tell me whether it's called PIPEDA or PIPEDA. I don't know. Then in 2012, the DMBOK wants you to know that one specific agency in the US did something about data privacy. This was the Federal Trade Commission. They put forward a privacy program criteria. If you know anything about the US government, it's incredibly fractious. So the FTC only has domain over a very specific aspect of the economy. It's not everything. This legislation only goes so far. It's important to know this because it's in the DMBOK. You might be tested on it. In 2016, the European Union wrote GDPR. Then here's some additional examples of data privacy that have been implemented since 2017. So in 2018, the state of California created the Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, and this applies only in the state of California. But then the challenge is California is like the 5th largest economy in the world. So for companies that want to do business in California, then they have to raise their data management standards. Or they could just implement a specific data management program for people who are customers in California. But it might be more simple just to raise the bar. So this was a challenge that companies started having to deal with in the US in 2000, or like companies that wanted to operate in the US, I should say, because it applies to anyone. We see an escalation of this in this year. These 4 states that are listed are enacting their own data privacy laws, and we still don't have a national standard in the US. So let's back up. Let's talk a bit about Canada. As we mentioned, in the year 2000, they put forward this legislation. Probably this is just something that you'd want to sticky note in your book, or if you have the PDF copy, just, highlight it. I wouldn't say you need to memorize these principles, but they're good to know in case you get a question about them. So in the EU, they have a number of different bodies that are responsible for various aspects of data privacy. One of those bodies is called EDPS, European Data Protection Supervisor. So they are still around. They're still involved in enforcing GDPR. In 2015, as a precursor to the legislation that was released the following year, they put forward an opinion on digital ethics. And here is that opinion. They called for future-oriented regulation of data processing, respect for the rights to privacy and data protection, accountable controllers who determine personal information processing, privacy-conscious engineering and design of data processing products and services, and empowered individuals. I definitely think you see this if you read GDPR. This is like very influential, that it's clear they're trying to take these principles and then make them into rules. It's pretty interesting how influential this has been. It's like a giant global step forward for data privacy. This is a repeat of our last slide, like a simplified version of it. The first pillar corresponds with the first aspect of the policy, which was future-oriented regulation. Second one, accountable controllers. Third one, privacy-conscious engineering and design. And the fourth is just empowered individuals. So again, this goes back to like data deletion, for example. All right. And then when GDPR was released the next year, they also had their own set of principles. So again, I would not memorize this. I would just put a sticky note so you know how to find it in case you see a question about this on the exam. Well, actually, that's it in terms of the content. Quickly, just some motivation for taking the test. It's really good to have a differentiated skill set. This is consistently rewarded in your career. So for example, for me, rather than becoming a super expert data scientist and learning computer vision or something, it was better to take this exam and get that end-to-end view of data management fundamentals. This was definitely a step up in my career relative to continuing to pursue the skills that I already had. Here's a bit about the exam. I would encourage you, if you're interested in moving forward, if you saw this presentation and it made sense to you, I would go ahead and buy the exam today if you haven't already. And the reason for that is that you have an unlimited amount of time to then schedule it, to like put it on your calendar. And what buying the exam gets you is a set of practice questions from the folks. Some of them actually even come up on the exam. Definitely you want to take some time to start quizzing yourself now. Research shows that the most effective way to learn something is to test yourself, even before you think you're ready. So practice questions, the free ones that are given to you, these are very helpful. We also offer additional practice questions on our site if you feel like that's beneficial to you. One thing that's a bit frustrating, I'll tell you why you're wrong. They don't provide an explanation. At least when I took them, they were kind of written to be a little bit confusing. I don't think they spent as much time on this as they do the questions that end up on the final exam, but we spent a lot of time on our questions. I can tell you they're very good and they have explanations for each answer. That's the main stuff I want to tell you about the setting up your test taking. When you get ready to sit for the exam, it is an open book test. So you'll want to have your copy of the data management body of knowledge, whether that's the physical copy or the ebook, but not both. That is specifically not allowed. On the FAQ page, you can read more about that. But it is an open book test, which is really nice because it replicates real world scenario where you can look things up if you need to. You will be tasked with answering 100 questions in an hour and a half. So the best way to do this is anytime you don't know the answer to a question right away, just flag it. Don't spend too much time on it because you want to make sure you get through all 100 questions. There's no penalty for guessing. So don't leave anything blank. Save the questions you don't know for the end. There's a flag feature in the platform. And then at the end, you can take the extra time that you have, go back and look at your flagged questions, look those up in the book. You have less than a minute per question. So you won't have time to look up every single question. Save that time, pass, profit, you'll do great. Let me pause. Any questions here?
What's the application process to submit? So if we are ready to take an exam in 3 months, what the first step we need to do to the CDMP or DMBOK website and enroll?
Yeah, let me go to the next slide, and I think that'll help. So what's the process for applying? So if you just want to take the fundamentals exam, all you have to do is purchase. There's a website for this. It's called cdmp.info. This is where you go to buy the exam if you want to continue in your trajectory as a data management expert. Then you will need to take the specialist exams that I mentioned earlier. You also need to submit some documentation of your industry experience. And then if you want to be recognized as a CDMP fellow, this is like super advanced. I don't know anybody who has this. I guess probably the leadership of DAMA does, but we do have people in our group who have attained the master's level certification, which is super cool. They have to have 10 years of experience at a minimum, and then they have to pass all 3 exams with a 80%. And the 3 exams are the fundamentals exam and then 2 specialist exams on topics of their choosing. So I hope that answers your question, Naresh.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, and I'm seeing some questions in the chat, so I'm going to go through those in order. So Kyle asks, how many hours of study do you need for exam preparation? I studied for probably an average of an hour and a half a day for a couple months. The length of your time studying is dependent on your goals for passing the exam. If you want to pass with a 60%, then a quick skim might be sufficient. If you want to pass with an 80%, you should dedicate more time to this, like more flashcards, more use of the Feynman technique, which is writing things down on a blank sheet of paper and really challenging yourself to do active recall. Another concept that could be helpful is making a mind map. I did a lot of these actually, drawing out how the different concepts from different chapters are related. So it's hard to say. This is why the CDMP study plan is 90 days. And then if you devoted like an hour a day, maybe 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes in the evening, or I think I did like 45 minutes because I really wanted to internalize this content. Hopefully that gives you a sense of where you want to go. Okay, Madeline asks, what are the type of questions? They are all theoretical. So this will not ask you what SQL query would I use to get this information for this analytical report? There's no SQL, there's no Python, there's no here's a chart, please analyze this. If you're interested, if those kinds of questions sound fun to you, there's another exam that we support. It's called the Certified Analytics Professional. And this could be a nice complementary test to take. Again, maybe do it after you take the CDMP, but this one is much more geared towards the technical side, which is cool. It's a very different experience. Okay, Stephen asks, do you book the date and time? No. So you can just buy the exam and have it in your back pocket. And then whenever you're ready to take the exam or even just start studying, you can then schedule it. It does not expire. It is just a lifetime commitment that you have if you put the money in. It's good accountability for actually taking the test, putting in the $300. It also gets you access to that test bank from the Data Management Association folks. And also it gets you access to the global data management organization. So you can send them an email and then they'll add you to a listserv or something if you want. Let me see if we have any more slides. This one shows the calendar that we go through on Facebook. So if you're a member of the Facebook group, you'll see this a lot. We just progress through the DMBOK in chapter order, which is actually not the method that I recommend to study. And the reason why is because the weighting of the chapters is so disproportionate. As we mentioned, the stuff that we studied was only 4%, but then in the month of February, the stuff that we're studying is 11%. So there's chapters here that are disproportionately weighted on the exam. I would recommend studying those first. The CDMP study plan is set up to help you do that. So it has a study schedule and a review schedule. And this way you're really focusing in on the 80-20, 20% of content that will drive 80% of your results. This is called the Pareto principle. So CDMP study plan is included in our membership, which I mentioned at the beginning, thanks to Vishal's excellent question. So if you get the membership, you'll also get the fundamentals notes, all of our practice questions, that's 150 questions, then some auxiliary benefits as well. So I mentioned the collaborative workspace and Zulip, also access to exclusive events. This event that we're having right here is specifically because this is the first one. In the future, it will be for the members. Naresh, do you have a question?
Yeah, sure. On the membership, when you mentioned with the membership, it comes 150 question bank. Is this as a question bank is different from the when you enroll for the CDMP?
Yes. Yeah, so we have our own questions. Again, you can just buy them on their own, but they also come as part of the membership. These are questions that I wrote with my team, so they're different than the questions that are provided by Dama, but they're in the same style. And each question includes an explanation of the correct answer and the corresponding page number, which goes to the pages of the electronic copy of the DMBOK.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, ideally, this would be reimbursed by your organization. I'm trying to partner with more companies to get the data management fundamentals front and center. So if you think your workplace might be interested in this, don't hesitate to reach out. You can send me a direct message on any of our social media. And our next event is going to be co-working. So we will read chapter 3 together silently, and then during the breaks, we will discuss. That's going to be next Wednesday. So very much looking forward to that. And that's it. So yeah, thank you guys so much for coming. Hopefully this was a helpful overview. And again, I'm just really glad you guys are here. Obviously, I place data management in a pretty highly weighted position in terms of things that it's important to learn. So thank you for sticking with me and for learning it and hopefully making your organization a little bit better.